The first light of dawn kissed the tranquil waters of the azure sea, turning its surface into a shimmering tapestry of gold and blue. The gentle waves caressed the shore of an isolated island, where towering cliffs shielded a small, hidden cove from the eyes of the world. This cove, with its pearly sands and whispering breezes, was a place of magic known only to a few. Beneath the waves, where the sunlight danced in fractured beams, lay a world unseen by human eyes. This was the realm of the merfolk, a vast underwater kingdom teeming with life and mystery. Coral castles of brilliant reds, pinks, and purples rose from the ocean floor, their spires reaching toward the surface. Schools of fish wove through the corals like threads of living silk, while creatures of all shapes and sizes moved in harmony through the crystal-clear waters. At the heart of this kingdom, in a palace carved from the deepest blue sapphire, lived the royal family. Queen Nerida, ruler of the sea, was as wise as she was beautiful. Her long hair the color of midnight, and her eyes as deep as the ocean itself. Her daughter, Princess Roya, was her pride and joy, a mermaid of extraordinary beauty and grace. With hair like spun silver and a voice that could soothe even the most turbulent seas, Roya was loved by all who knew her. But there was one thing that set her apart from the other mermaids. She was born without a voice, unlike her mother and the other merfolk, whose songs could charm the waves and command the creatures of the deep. Marina could not sing. She communicated through gestures, her hands as expressive as her silent lips. Her eyes spoke volumes, reflecting every thought and emotion that her voice could not convey. Despite her lack of a voice, Marina was content in her underwater world. She spent her days exploring the reefs, playing with the dolphins, and learning the secrets of the sea from the ancient sea turtles that had seen generations of merfolk come and go. But as the years passed, a restlessness began to grow within her. She felt a longing that she could not explain, a desire to see beyond the boundaries of her kingdom. One evening, as the moonlight filtered through the waves like strands of silver, Roya swam to the surface, her heart heavy with a longing she did not understand. She broke through the water's surface and gazed at the world above. The stars sparkled like diamonds against the velvet sky, and the moon hung low, casting a soft glow on the land that lay beyond the sea. It was then that she saw a figure standing on the shore, silhouetted against the moonlit sky. It was a man, tall and strong, with hair that gleamed like gold in the moonlight. He stood with his feet in the surf, staring out at the ocean as if searching for something or someone. Roya's heart skipped a beat. She had heard stories of the humans who lived on the land, but she had never seen one up close. Curious and captivated, she swam closer, careful to keep her head just above the water, so that only her eyes peeked out. The man seemed unaware of her presence as he gazed out to sea, his expression one of deep sorrow. Roya could feel his sadness, even from a distance. It tugged at her heart, compelling her to get closer. She wanted to comfort him, to reach out to him, but she hesitated. What would he think of her if he saw her? Would he be frightened, or would he welcome her? For hours, Roya watched him, her heart aching with a mixture of empathy and curiosity. As the first light of dawn began to break, the man turned and walked back up the beach, disappearing into the shadows of the cliffs. Roya remained where she was, her gaze fixed on the spot where he had stood, her mind racing with questions. Who was this man, and why was he so sad? What was it about him that drew her to him so strongly? Roya knew she had to find out. She made a silent vow to return to the surface the next evening, and every evening after that, until she discovered the answers to the questions that now filled her mind. The days passed slowly for Roya as she awaited the arrival of night. She continued her duties in the underwater kingdom, but her thoughts were always on the man she had seen on the shore. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she swam to the surface and watched for him, her heart pounding with anticipation. And And each evening, he was there, standing in the same spot, gazing out at the sea. Sometimes he would sit on the sand, his head bowed as if lost in thought. And other times he would walk along the shore, his footsteps leaving a trail in the wet sand. But always, he seemed alone, his shoulders heavy with an unseen burden. Roya longed to approach him, to reveal herself, but fear held her back. She had heard tales of the dangers that awaited merfolk who ventured too close to humans. Some were captured, never to be seen again, while others were hunted for their scales and fins. But something about this man made Roya believe he was different. There was a kindness in his eyes, a gentleness that spoke to her soul. One night, as the moon shone brightly overhead, Roya made her decision. She would approach the man and reveal herself. She would find a way to communicate with him, to understand the source of his sorrow, and perhaps even help him. She waited until he had settled on the sand, his gaze fixed on the horizon, before slowly swimming closer. Her heart raced as she drew nearer, her silver hair trailing behind her like a ribbon of light. When she was just a few feet from the shore, she paused, her eyes fixed on the man's face. He looked so different up close. His features were strong and handsome, but there was a sadness in his eyes that tugged at her heart. For a moment, Roya hesitated, unsure of what to do. But then the man sighed deeply, his breath a soft whisper in the night, and Roya knew she couldn't stay hidden any longer. Slowly, she rose from the water, her upper body emerging from the waves. She kept her movements gentle and deliberate. Not wanting to startle him, the water lapped around her waist as she lifted a hand, waving it slightly to catch his attention. The man's eyes widened in surprise. As he caught sight of her, he scrambled to his feet, taking a step back as he stared at her in disbelief. For a moment, neither of them moved, both frozen in place by the shock of the encounter. Finally, Roya smiled a small, tentative smile that she hoped would reassure him. She placed a hand over her heart, then extended it towards him in a gesture of peace. The man blinked, as if trying to decide whether what he was seeing was real. Slowly, he took a step forward, his eyes never leaving her face. What are you? Roya wished she could answer, but all she could do was smile and shake her head slightly. She placed a finger over her lips, then shook her head again, hoping he would understand that she could not speak. The man frowned, his brow furrowing in concern. "You can't talk?" he asked. Roya nodded, her eyes filling with a mixture of frustration and sadness. She had never felt the loss of her voice as keenly as she did in that moment. There was so much she wanted to say to this man, so many questions she wanted to ask Dot, but the man's expression softened, and he took another step closer. "It's all right," he said gently. "I can understand you, even without words." He paused, his gaze searching her face. Are you a mermaid?" Roya nodded again, her heart pounding in her chest. She could see the curiosity and wonder in his eyes, but there was no fear, no revulsion. He seemed more intrigued than anything else, and for that, she was grateful. The man smiled, a faint, hesitant smile, and Roya felt her heart lift. "My name is Elias," he said, his voice low and soothing. "I've heard stories about your kind, but I never thought I'd actually meet one of you." Roya pointed to him, then placed her hand over her heart, hoping to convey her own name. Elias watched her for a moment, then nodded. "Your name? It starts with an M, doesn't it?" he guessed. Roya's eyes widened in surprise, and she nodded enthusiastically. Elias chuckled softly. "Roya?" he asked. She nodded again, a bright smile spreading across her face. It was as if he had read her mind. "Plucking her name from the depths of her thoughts, he asked, his voice a mixture of awe and confusion. As the days turned into weeks, Roya and Elias continued to meet by the shore each evening. Their silent conversations grew more natural with each passing day. as they found ways to communicate without words. Elias would bring a small notebook with him, writing down his thoughts and questions for Roya to read, and she would respond with gestures and expressions, her eyes speaking the words her voice could not. Elias told her about his life on the land, about the small village where he lived with his family, and about the quiet coastal town nestled between the cliffs and the forest. He spoke of his younger sister, Aurora, who was as curious as a fox and as stubborn as a mule, and of his father, a fisherman who had taught him the ways of the sea. But as much as Elias shared with Marina, there was always a lingering sadness in his words, a shadow that darkened his otherwise gentle demeanor. One night, as the waves lapped gently against the shore, Roya noticed that Elias seemed more distant than usual. He sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon, the notebook lying forgotten in the sand beside him. His hands were clenched into fists, and his shoulders were tense, as if he was carrying a heavy burden. Roya swam closer, her silver hair trailing behind her like a ribbon of light. She reached out and gently placed a hand on Elias's arm, her touch as soft as the caress of the sea. He turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a pain that she had never seen before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with a heavy sigh, Elias picked up the notebook and began to write. His hand moved slowly, almost reluctantly, as if each word was a weight that he struggled to bear. When he finally handed the notebook to Marina, she read the words carefully, her heart sinking with each line. "I lost someone important to me," Elias had written. "Someone I loved very much. Her name was Selene, and she was everything to me. We were going to be married, but she drowned. The sea took her from me." Roya's eyes filled with tears as she read his words. She had always sensed that Elias carried a deep sorrow, but she hadn't known the cause. Now, as she looked at him, she could see the depth of his grief, the wound that had never fully healed. Elias continued to write, his hand shaking slightly as he poured out his heart on the page. "Every night, I come here to the shore, hoping that somehow I'll find her again. But she's gone, and all I have left are memories." Roya's heart ached for Elias. She wished she could do something to ease his pain, to take away the sadness that weighed so heavily on him. But what could she do? She was a mermaid bound to the sea, while Elias was a man of the land, tethered to a life she could never fully understand. That maybe, just maybe, the sea will return her to me. Gently, Roya took the notebook from Elias and began to write her own message. She wrote slowly, carefully choosing her words, knowing that this was the most important thing she had ever tried to say. "I am sorry for your loss," she wrote, "but the sea did not take Selene to hurt you. The sea is not cruel. It is just a part of life. Sometimes the ocean gives, and sometimes it takes away. But it is not evil, and it does not seek to cause pain." When Elias read her words, he looked at her with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. "I know," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I know the sea didn't mean to take her, but it still hurts." Roya nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. She knew the pain of loss, the emptiness that came from losing someone you loved. But she also knew that life went on, even when the heart was broken. With a gentle smile, Roya reached out and took Elias's hand in hers. She squeezed it softly, offering him comfort in the only way she could. Elias looked at her, and for the first time since they had met, Roya saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. As the moon rose higher in the sky, Elias and Roya sat together in silence, their hands still entwined. The waves whispered around them, as if the sea itself was offering its own words of comfort. And in that moment, Roya knew that she had found something special with Elias, an unspoken bond that transcended words, a connection that went deeper than the sea itself. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Roya and Elias grew stronger. Their silent conversations became more fluid, and they began to understand each other on a level that went beyond words. Elias found solace in Roya's presence, and she, in turn, found herself drawn to him in ways she had never imagined. But even as their connection deepened, Roya could feel a growing tension within herself. The more time she spent with Elias, the more she felt the pull of the sea, a call that resonated deep within her soul. It was as if the ocean was trying to remind her of who she was, of the world she belonged to, a world that was far different from the one Elias inhabited. One evening, as they sat together on the shore, Elias turned to Marina with a look of determination in his eyes. He had something in his hand, something that glittered in the moonlight. When Roya saw what it was, her heart skipped a beat. It was a delicate silver necklace, adorned with a small, intricate charm in the shape of a seashell. "I made this for you," Elias said, his voice soft but steady. "I wanted you to have something to remember me by, no matter where you are." Roya's eyes widened as she took the necklace from Elias. It was beautiful, crafted with care and love. She felt a surge of emotion as she realized what this gesture meant. Elias was giving her a piece of himself, a tangible reminder of their time together. But as she held the necklace in her hands, Roya also felt the weight of her own secret. She had never told Elias about the call of the deep, the pull of the ocean that was becoming harder and harder to resist. She had tried to ignore it, to push it aside, but it was always there, a constant reminder that she was not truly free to live as she wished. With a heavy heart, Roya placed the necklace around her neck, the cool metal resting against her skin. She smiled at Elias, but there was a sadness in her eyes that she couldn't hide. "Thank you," she mouthed, hoping he could see how much his gift meant to her. Elias smiled back, but there was a hint of concern in his expression. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers brushing against her skin like a whisper. "Roya," he said softly, "I know there's something you're not telling me. I can see it in your eyes." Roya looked down, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she couldn't keep her secret from Elias any longer, but the thought of telling him filled her with dread. How could she explain the pull of the ocean, the call of the deep that was becoming impossible to ignore? How could she tell him that she might have to leave him, to return to the sea and the world she belonged to? Taking a deep breath, Roya looked up at Elias, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and sadness. Slowly, she reached for the notebook and began to write, her hand trembling as she formed the words that would change everything. "There is something I need to tell you," she wrote, "something I've been afraid to say. The sea, it calls to me. I can feel it pulling me back, stronger every day. I don't want to leave you, but I don't know if I can resist it." When Elias read her words, his expression changed. The concern in his eyes deepened, and he looked at Roya with a mixture of understanding and sorrow. "The sea is your home," he said quietly. "I've always known that, and I would never ask you to stay if it meant denying who you are." Roya's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. She knew Elias was right, but that didn't make it any easier. She had found something special with him, something that went beyond the boundaries of their worlds. But now, it seemed that those very boundaries were pulling them apart. Elias reached out and took her hand in his grip firm and reassuring. "No matter what happens," he said, his voice steady, "I want you to know that I will always be grateful for the time we've spent together. You brought light into my life, Roya, and I'll never forget that." Roya squeezed his hand, her heart breaking at the thought of leaving him. She wanted to stay, to be with him, but she knew that the sea would not let her go so easily. The call of the deep was growing stronger, and she could feel its pull with every passing day. As they sat together in the moonlight, the waves gently lapping at their feet, Roya made a silent promise to herself. She would cherish every moment she had left with Elias, And when the time came to return to the sea, she would go with no regrets. But in her heart, Roya couldn't help but wonder, was there a way to bridge the gap between their worlds? Could she find a way to stay with Elias without denying the call of the ocean? It was a question that haunted her, even as she tried to focus on the present, to savor the time she had left with the man she had come to love. The days that followed were bittersweet for Roya. She cherished every moment with Elias, treasuring the time they spent together on the shore. They laughed, shared stories, and explored the coastline, discovering hidden coves and secret places where they could be alone, away from the prying eyes of the world. But even as they grew closer, Roya could feel the pull of the sea growing stronger. It was as if the ocean itself was calling out to her, its voice growing louder with each passing day. The waves seemed to whisper her name, beckoning her to return to the depths where she belonged. The once soothing lull of the ocean had become a relentless echo in her mind, reminding her of her true nature and the life she had left behind. Elias noticed the change in her. He saw the way her gaze lingered on the horizon, the way she would often pause in the middle of their conversations, lost in thought. He knew that the time was coming when she would have to make a choice that neither of them wanted to face. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the sea, Elias and Roya sat together on the shore, their hands entwined. The air was thick with unspoken words, the weight of the inevitable hanging heavy between them. Elias turned to Roya, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "Roya," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "I know that the sea is calling you. I can see it in your eyes, and I can feel it in the way you've been pulling away. I don't want to lose you, but I also don't want to keep you from where you truly belong." Roya's heart ached at his words. She knew that he was right, but the thought of leaving him was almost too much to bear. She had found something with Elias that she had never known before: love, companionship, and a connection that transcended the boundaries of their worlds. But the call of the sea was undeniable, and she knew that she couldn't ignore it forever. With tears in her eyes, Marina picked up the notebook and began to write. Her hand trembled as she formed the words, each one a dagger to her heart. "I don't want to leave you," she wrote, "but the sea is a part of me. It's in my blood, my soul. I can't turn my back on it, no matter how much I want to stay with you." Elias read her words, his expression pained but understanding. "I know," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly, "and I would never ask you to give up who you are. But Roya, is there no way for us to be together? Is there no way to bridge the gap between our worlds?" Roya looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of their impossible situation. She had asked herself that same question countless times, searching for a solution that would allow them to be together. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find a way to reconcile the two parts of her life: the part that belonged to the sea, and the part that had come to love Elias. "I've searched for a way," she wrote, her tears falling onto the page, "but I don't know if it exists. The sea is my home, and the land is yours. How can we be together when our worlds are so different?" Elias's eyes filled with tears as he read her words. He knew that she was right, but the thought of losing her was almost unbearable. "I don't want to let you go," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But if there's no other way, then I'll respect your choice. I just want you to be happy, Roya, even if that means saying goodbye." Roya's heart broke at his words. She could see the pain in his eyes, the agony of knowing that their time together was running out. She wanted to find a way to stay with him, to bridge the gap between their worlds. But she knew that the sea would not release its hold on her so easily. With a heavy heart, Roya reached up and touched the necklace that Elias had given her. The small seashell charm glittered in the fading light, a symbol of the love they had shared. She knew that she would carry it with her always, no matter where her journey took her. But as she looked into Elias's eyes, Roya made a silent vow. She would not give up hope. She would search for a way to be with him, to find a place where the sea and the land could meet, where they could be together without sacrificing who they were. "I'll come back to you," she wrote, her hand steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I don't know how, and I don't know when, but I'll find a way. I promise." Elias smiled through his tears, his heart swelling with love for the mermaid who had captured his soul. "I'll be waiting," he said softly, his voice filled with determination. "No matter how long it takes, I'll be here, waiting for you." Roya nodded, her heart filled with both hope and sorrow. She knew that their path would not be easy, that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges and heartache. But she also knew that their love was strong, enough to overcome even the greatest of obstacles. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Roya leaned forward and pressed her lips to Elias's, their kiss a bittersweet farewell and a promise of what was to come. The taste of salt water lingered on her lips as she pulled away, her heart heavy with the weight of the choice she had made. With one last, lingering look at Elias, Roya turned and dove into the sea. The water embraced her like an old friend, the waves closing over her head as she swam deeper into the depths. The call of the deep was strong, but so was the love she carried in her heart. And as she swam farther and farther from the shore, Rhea made a vow to herself. She would find a way to return to Elias, no matter how long it took. She would search the ocean's depths, explore the hidden corners of the world, and uncover the secrets that lay beneath the waves. For their love was worth any sacrifice. And Marina knew that she would move the very ocean itself to be with the man. The days and weeks that followed were a blur for Roya as she swam through the vast expanse of the ocean, searching for a way to bridge the gap between her world and Elias's. She traveled far from her kingdom, venturing into uncharted waters and seeking out creatures of legend who were said to possess great knowledge and power. She visited the ancient sea dragons, who dwelled in the deepest trenches of the ocean, their massive forms coiled around the pillars of the earth. She sought out the elusive seers of the sea, who could peer into the currents of time and see the future. She even braved the lair of the great Leviathan, a creature of unimaginable size and strength, who was said to hold the secrets of the ocean's most ancient magic. But no matter where she went or whom she spoke to, Roya found no answers. The creatures she encountered spoke of the immutable laws of nature, of the boundaries that separated the sea from the land, and of the dangers that awaited those who tried to cross them. "You are of the sea, child," an ancient sea dragon rumbled, its voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "To try and bind yourself to the land is to go against the very essence of your being. The ocean is your home, your life," the seer whispered, her voice like the rustling of seaweed in the current. "To leave it behind is to sever a part of yourself. The land and the sea are two sides of the same coin." The Leviathan intoned, its eyes glowing like molten lava. "They cannot exist without each other, but neither can they be one." Roya listened to their words, her heart growing heavier with each passing day. But she refused to give up. She had made a promise to Elias, and she was determined to keep it. She knew that there had to be a way, a path that would allow them to be together, without forsaking the ocean. That was a part of her very soul. Finally, after months of searching, Royale heard of a place where the boundaries between the sea and the land were said to blur, a place where the ocean met the sky, and where the laws of nature could be bent, if only for a moment. This place was known as the Isle of the Lost, a mysterious and forbidden island that lay far beyond the reach of any known map. It was said to be a place of great power, where the sea and the land were in constant flux, and where those who were brave enough could find answers to the deepest. Roya knew that the Isle of the Lost was dangerous, that many who had sought it out had never returned. But she also knew that it was her only hope. If there was any place in the world where she could find a way to be with Elias, it was there. With renewed determination, Roya set out on her journey, swimming through uncharted waters and braving treacherous currents as she made her way to the Isle of the Lost. The ocean around her grew darker and colder as she ventured farther from the safety of her kingdom. But she pressed on, driven by the love that burned brightly in her heart. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, 𝐬𝐿 caught sight of the Isle of the Lost on the horizon. The island was shrouded in mist, its jagged cliffs rising like the teeth of a monstrous creature. The waves crashed violently against the rocks, sending sprays of foam high into the air. There was an otherworldly quality to the place, as if it existed on the edge of reality, where the boundaries between the sea and the sky were thin and fragile. 𝐬𝐿 hesitated for only a moment before swimming closer, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. She could feel the power that emanated from the island, a raw and untamed force that seemed to pulse through the very water around her. The closer she got, the more the sea itself seemed to resist her, as if warning her to turn back. But 𝐬𝐿 was undeterred. She had come too far, and she would not be stopped now. As she approached the island, the mist parted to reveal a small cove hidden among the cliffs. The water here was eerily calm, and the air was thick with an ancient, almost sacred energy. 𝐬𝐿 swam cautiously into the cove, her eyes scanning the rocky shoreline for any signs of life. The beach was deserted, save for a single stone altar that stood at the water's edge. It was carved with intricate symbols that Marina did not recognize, and at its center lay a large conch shell, its surface shimmering with an unnatural light. 𝐬𝐿 felt a shiver run down her spine as she approached the altar. There was something both beautiful and terrifying about the conch, as if it held the power to grant her deepest wish or to destroy her completely. But she had come too far to turn back now. With trembling hands, 𝐬𝐿 reached out and touched the conch. The moment her fingers made contact with the shell, a wave of energy surged through her, filling her with a strange, exhilarating power. The air around her seemed to vibrate, and the water in the cove began to churn as if responding to some invisible force. 𝐬𝐿 closed her eyes and focused on her wish. She envisioned Ilias's face, the warmth of his smile, the way his eyes lit up when he looked at her. She thought of the life they could have together, the love they could share. If only she could find a way to bridge the gap between their worlds. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the roar of the ocean. "Please grant me the power to be with him." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, slowly, the conch began to glow with a brilliant light, and the symbols on the altar flared to life. The power that had been building in the air seemed to coalesce around 𝐬𝐿, wrapping her in a warm, golden embrace. She felt her body begin to change, the familiar sensation of transformation taking hold as her tail split into legs, and her gills retracted into her skin. But this time, the transformation felt different. There was no pain, no sense of losing a part of herself. Instead, 𝐬𝐿 felt a deep, harmonious connection with the sea, as if the ocean itself was merging with her very soul. She could still feel the pull of the deep, the call of the ocean that had always been a part of her, but it was no longer a force that she had to resist. It was simply there, a part of her that would always be with her, no matter where she went. As the light from the conch faded, 𝐬𝐿 opened her eyes and looked down at herself. She was standing on the beach, her feet sinking into the wet sand, but she still felt the presence of the ocean within her. She could feel the currents beneath the surface, the ebb and flow of the tides, as if they were an extension of her own body. Tentatively, 𝐬𝐿 took a step forward, then another. Her legs were steady, strong, but there was no sense of disconnection from the sea. It was as if she had become something new, something that could exist in both worlds without sacrificing either part of herself. Tears welled in 𝐬𝐿's eyes as she realized what had happened. The Isle of the Lost had granted her wish. She had been given the power to live on land with Elias, while still remaining connected to the ocean that was her true home. with a heart full of hope and gratitude. 𝐬𝐿 turned and began to make her way back to the sea. She knew that the journey back to Elias would be long and arduous, but she was no longer afraid. She had been given a gift, a chance to be with the man she loved without losing herself in the process. As she swam away from the Isle of the Lost, the mist closed in behind her, hiding the island from view once more. But 𝐬𝐿 did not look back. Her heart was focused on the future, on the life she would build with Elias, and on the love that had given her the strength to face the unknown. The journey back to Elias was filled with anticipation and excitement, but also a lingering sense of disbelief. 𝐬𝐿 could hardly believe that she had been granted such a miraculous gift. She had crossed the boundaries of her world to find him, and now she was returning with the promise of a life they could share together. When 𝐬𝐿 finally reached the familiar shores where she and Elias had spent so many nights, her heart swelled with emotion. The beach was exactly as she had left it, the waves gently lapping at the sand, the cliffs towering above like silent guardians. And there, standing at the water's edge, was Elias. He was looking out at the sea, his expression pensive, as if he had been waiting for her. 𝐬𝐿's breath caught in her throat as she saw him, his tall, strong figure silhouetted against the setting sun, his hair tousled by the breeze. She could see the longing in his eyes, the same longing that had driven her to embark on her journey to the Isle of the Lost. With a soft smile, 𝐬𝐿 stepped out of the water and onto the sand. The feel of the earth beneath her feet was strange, but also comforting. She was no longer torn between two worlds. She had found a way to belong to both. 𝐬𝐿ias, she called out, her voice carrying on the wind. Elias turned at the sound of her voice, his eyes widening in shock and disbelief. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then, with a shout of joy, he ran toward her, his arms outstretched. 𝐬𝐿 laughed as Elias scooped her up in his arms, spinning her around in a circle before pulling her into a tight embrace. The feel of his warmth, the steady beat of his heart, was more real and comforting than anything she had ever known. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him close, never wanting to let go. "You came back," Elias whispered, his voice filled with awe and relief. "You really came back." 𝐬𝐿 pulled back slightly, just enough to look into his eyes. She could see the tears glistening there, the overwhelming emotion that mirrored her own. "I promised I would," she said softly. "And now, we can be together. I found a way." Elias's eyes searched her face, as if trying to understand what she meant. "But how?" 𝐬𝐿 smiled, her heart bursting with love for this man who had waited for her, who had believed in her even when the odds seemed insurmountable. "The Isle of the Lost," she explained. "It granted me the power to live on land without losing my connection to the sea. I can be with you, Elias, without giving up who I am." 𝐬𝐿 shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "No, Elias, it's you who's the miracle. You showed me that love can bridge any distance, cross any boundary. You gave me the strength to find my way back to you." Elias leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss filled with all the love and longing they had shared. It was a kiss that sealed the bond between them, a promise that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a warm, golden light. The sea whispered softly at their feet, a gentle reminder of the journey they had taken, the trials they had overcome. And in that moment, Marina knew that she had found her true home not in the sea or on the land, but in the heart of the man she loved. In the years that followed, 𝐬𝐿 and Elias built a life together that was as beautiful and unique as the love they shared. They made their home by the sea, where the land met the water, and where Marina could feel the ocean's presence even as she walked on solid ground. 𝐬𝐿 continued to explore the depths of the ocean, using the connection she had gained from the Isle of the Lost to communicate with the creatures of the deep and learn the ancient secrets of the sea. She became a bridge between the two worlds, helping to foster understanding and cooperation between the land and the ocean. Elias, for his part, found joy in their life together, grateful every day for the miracle that had brought Marina back to him. He continued his work as a fisherman, but he also took on a new role as a protector of the sea, advocating for the preservation of the ocean and its creatures. Together, they raised a family, their children inheriting both their mother's connection to the sea and their father's love of the land. The little ones played in the waves, swam with the dolphins, and explored the tide pools, their laughter echoing across the shore. And every evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Roya and Elias would walk hand in hand along the beach, watching the colors of the sky reflect on the water. They would talk of the day's adventures, share their dreams for the future, and simply enjoy the peace that came from being together.